Hi, my name is Claire Stefanik, and this is the tragic case of the Hinterkaifeck murders. Something that I think is important to go over before we get into the case is the family tree. It was kind of confusing when I was first learning about the case, so I figured it'd be good to explain the family dynamics. So we have the mother, Cecilia, and the father, Andreas. They were married and then had a daughter named Victoria. Victoria married Carl Gabriel. He was said to have died in World War I. However, before then, they had a daughter who they named Young Cecilia. And then there was a son of Victoria's, Joseph. However, this is when it gets a little confusing and messy. It was unsure, they were unsure if Joseph was Andreas's child and there was like incest that happened in the family, or if it was actually Carl Gabriel's son. And then the sixth victim was Maria. Carl was not one of the victims in the murders, but Maria was. Some background information to know is that a previous maid had quit working about a year earlier, who claimed to have heard movement in the attic and believed that the house was haunted. And then later on, Andreas Gruber thought that he heard the same movement about a week before the murders. However, he found nothing when he checked the attic. The murders took place on March 31st in 1922, and that is when the Gruber family and their maid, Maria, were murdered. It took a few days before the bodies were found. Mail started to pile up. Cecilia had not shown up to school, and the family did not make it to church, which was very out of the ordinary for them. And this is when the bodies were discovered by a concerned neighbor, Lorenz, on April 4th of 1922. All of the bodies were not found in the same place. Andrea, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia were all found dead in the barn, piled on top of hay. Joseph was found in the master bedroom, and Maria, the maid, was found in the dining room. The murder weapon was later to be identified as a mattock, which is an axe-like tool that belonged to the family. Some evidence found, which there wasn't much, was footprints that were leading up to the house. However, they never saw footprints leading away. However, they were in the snow, so it is possible that they had melted away or changed over time. A newspaper was in the house that the family had not subscribed to, so it was very odd that there was that newspaper there. The family's food had been cooked and eaten after the murders had taken place, which suggested that whoever killed them had stayed there afterwards. Also, the animals were fed after the family was killed, and then one of the family's house keys had went missing previous to the murders. Just a couple theories without getting too deep into them. One of them was that Carl Gabriel never died in World War I, came back and found out that Joseph was not his son and killed the family in a fit of rage. And then another one that I had read about was that the neighbor, Lorenz, who found the bodies, had tampered with the bodies. However, there was no evidence that proved that he actually killed them, so it was not a very strong lead. And then the case was closed in 1955 with no solid leads. It was relatively easy to find sources about the case. However, the hard part was knowing what to believe. I read a lot more sources than what is listed right here. However, these are the ones that we ended up using. But a lot of them had different information, different theories. They stated that different evidence was found. So I just kind of went with whatever showed up the most and assumed that that was correct, because it seemed the most logical. But I would say that was the toughest part about using the sources. So in this project, I recreated 3 different scenes because there were 3 different places that there were bodies found. The first one is just an overall view. This is the bedroom where the body of Joseph was found. This room has a bed, a nightstand, dresser, paintings. There was a cross hanging over the bed in one of the pictures, so I added that in there. A door and 5 windows. Only 3 were pictured in the picture that I could get in view. And then evidence number 1 is the body of Joseph. Evidence number 3 is blood that had splattered on the wall. And then evidence number 5 is also a pool of blood splatter. Evidence number 4 is the bed that was in the bedroom. And then again, evidence number 2 was more blood splatter. The next room that has an overall view is the dining room where the body of the maid Maria was found. This room had a dining room table, 2 chairs, a door, and 3 windows. Evidence number 6 is blood splatter. Evidence number 7 is the body of Maria. Evidence number 8 is again blood splatter. Evidence number 9 is a dining room table. The last overall picture is in the barn where most of the bodies were found. This picture shows multiple blood splatters, the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia, a shelving unit, 2 piles of hay, 3 doors, the mattock, which was the murder weapon, and 5 windows. Evidence number 10, 11, and 12 are all blood splatter. Evidence number 13 is a shelving unit and window. Evidence number 14 is the murder weapon, a mattock. Evidence number 15 is a pile of hay. I incorporated this because the animals were fed after they were killed, so there had to have been hay that didn't have blood on it, that they could somehow feed the animals without being seen about having bloody hay around. Evidence number 16 is more blood splatter. Evidence number 17 is a pile of bloody hay. Evidence number 18 is the body of Andreas. Evidence number 19 is the body of Cecilia. Evidence number 20 is the body of young Cecilia. And evidence number 21 is the body of Victoria. Here is a quick look at the image log, which shows the photo, number, the distance, which is either overall, mid-range, or close-up, the evidence number shown in the photo, and the description of each photo. Here is the crime scene sketch of the bedroom, along with the bedroom measurement table. This is the crime scene sketch of the dining room, along with the dining room measurement table. And then the crime scene sketch of the barn, along with the crime scene measurement of the barn table, which is a bit longer because there was a lot of evidence in the barn. There was not very much evidence collected at the time, which is something that I found common among all of the articles that I read. They had like conspiracy theories, I guess you could call them, about what happened, which kind of included different pieces of evidence. However, there were a couple pieces of evidence that were common throughout. The one piece of evidence that was in every single article was that the mattock was the murder weapon and it was found at the crime scene. This would be determined due to the blood found on the weapon and the injuries on the victims. However, we don't know much more information about how they were killed other than it was with that piece of evidence. The next common piece of evidence that I found on many of the articles is that there was footprints leading up to the house in the snow. However, I don't feel that there's much that they could do with these prints because, one, they're in the snow and snow falls and snow melts, obviously, so those prints could change over time, and they just, I guess, didn't think to collect, like, shoe imprint evidence or tried to because I couldn't find where there was any of that actually collected. But the picture that is in the slide is not evidence that was actually found at the scene. The last common piece of evidence that I found among the articles was that there was a newspapers found in the house that did not belong to the family. They did not subscribe or pay for these newspapers, so it is thought that whoever killed them or the multiple people that killed them brought the newspapers with them. There was, of course, the other evidence, or maybe I should say, like, things that people speculated that whoever killed them cooked and ate in their house after they were already killed, and also that for several days after they were killed, whoever killed them fed their animals, which I guess there has to be some sort of evidence for that. However, I couldn't find any, like, concrete evidence that that happened, which leads to my biggest case takeaway, which is the importance of collecting any and all evidence thoroughly. Evidence is crucial when finding out the truth behind these crimes, and without the evidence, the killers cannot be caught, and that is something that I have been learning throughout this entire class and with this case specifically. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to learn about everyone else's cases.